wanted to get away from home, and he wanted to not be known as somebody's little brother anymore. So he received a bachelor's degree, and after spent nearly 4 years as a hospital corpsman in the Navy. He came to Chapel Hill to do graduate work in biostatistics and epidemiology at the School of Public Health, and worked as an occupational health research at UNC for a few years. And then he and his family moved to Swaziland in 1983, where he was the health statistician for the Kingdom of Swaziland. In 1986, he moved to Lesotho, where he was an assistant to the country's epidemiologist. In 1990, he and his family moved back to Durham and took a position with the North Carolina Central Cancer Registry. And he retired from there in 2004 and moved to Uganda, where he oversaw the program of the Mennonite Central Committee with projects in HIV/AIDS, education, and peace building. He retired in 2010 and moved back to Durham. And it was after that point that he became involved with the Poor People's Campaign, and both Dale and his wife serve on the state coordinating committee for the Poor People's Campaign. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his 3 grandchildren, bird watching, and I can happily attest that he plays the piano beautifully for the Church of Reconciliation. So Dale, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Pat. Let me begin by telling a little bit more of my story about how I got involved with the Poor People's Campaign. Pat mentioned I grew up in southern Minnesota. It was a very conservative Republican background. But while I was still in high school, I began questioning some of the things I'd been taught. My introduction to racism was in the summer before my junior year of high school. And my brother had an African-American roommate in college, and he did not have a summer job. So my brother asked my parents if Dick could come and spend the summer at our house and work in the local vegetable canning factory in town. My father was a well-respected school teacher in town, and he talked to the factory manager and got Dick a job. So Dick's rent for the summer was to give me piano lessons, since Dick was a very accomplished pianist. I heard the N-word a bit that summer, and people were astounded to learn that Dick slept in the same bedroom as me and my brothers. So I learned about how racist my town was that summer. During the fall of my senior year of college, my draft board classified me as 1A, that is, eligible for the draft, even though I was enrolled full-time and getting good grades. I was in the lab with my advisor one day, and I was talking to him about the struggles I was having with the draft board. And he said, "That is such a violation of the person you are." I didn't really understand that at the time, but I realized that he knew me better than I knew myself. I was able to graduate and then was faced with being drafted into the Army. My options were to be drafted, to enlist, or to go to Canada. But I had no connections in Canada, so I enlisted in the Navy as a hospital corpsman. My reasoning was that it was better to spend 4 years helping to save lives rather than 2 years learning to kill people and maybe even doing so. So I spent 3 years, 8 months, 7 days, and 10 hours in the Navy. And the last 10 plus months were in Vietnam as a medic with the Marines. I had one voting experience that I thought you might find interesting. The year was 1970, so it was not a presidential election year. And I was staying with my parents after I got out of the Navy for a few weeks. And since I had been either in college or in the Navy, my parents' home was my address. So I went to vote in the small town where I grew up, and people knew that my parents were Republicans. So when I went in, the Democratic poll watcher challenged my right to vote. And the Republican poll watcher came to my defense. Obviously, neither of them knew that I would be voting for the Democratic ticket. I came to the School of Public Health to do graduate work and then moved to Swaziland, as Pat mentioned. During our time in Southern Africa, I worked in public health, and my wife worked at an anti-apartheid organization in Lesotho. we were persona non grata in South Africa, allowed to travel through, but with a lot of hassle. Um, I could tell lots of stories about our experiences in apartheid South Africa as a multiracial family, like getting kicked out of a restaurant, being pointed at, being hassled at border posts and police checkpoints. But at the same time, there were some very heartwarming encounters with people who were looking for a better future. Fast forward, I took an early retirement, moved to Uganda, moved back to Durham. And after I moved back to Durham, I got involved in lots of organizations, focused mostly on environmental issues, on healthcare, on peace issues. And then came 2013 and the Moral Monday events in Raleigh. And I think that I missed only one of those. I realized that the Moral Monday encompassed everything that I was engaged in, all of the issues. And each week they focused on a different issue. So I did civil disobedience on the week that they focused on healthcare. That spring and summer, there were about 950 people who were arrested for civil disobedience, charged with trespassing in the General Assembly. Over the next few years, I was arrested again during the protest about HB2, the bathroom bill. That was 2016. And then in 2017, I was arrested again in the General Assembly, protesting about the failure to expand Medicaid. The first two charges have been dismissed, but the third one is still lingering. I have no idea what's going to happen with that one. And I could tell you lots of stories about sitting in courtrooms and the whole process of that. I'll spare you all of that. As the Poor People's Campaign got reinvigorated in 2018, I was asked to be the data manager for the state of North Carolina. And then in 2019, I was asked to be the treasurer for North Carolina. So if you're on our email list, you probably get a weekly message from the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, and usually on Tuesday. And my wife is the person who sends those out. So where are we now? Let me describe a bit about the campaign. Reverend Barber makes a point of saying that we are not an organization, but an organism or a movement. So we talk about 140 million poor and low wealth people in the country. That is 42% of the population of the country. This is based on the supplemental poverty measure. Now, the official poverty measure is based only on the cost of food. The supplemental poverty measure takes housing, clothing, and utilities into account as well as food, but it still fails to account for healthcare, transportation, and other necessary expenses. The Institute for Policy Studies has an excellent piece about this on their website. To quote them, when 55% of Americans struggle to pay medical bills, 40% of adults have less than $400 in savings, and nearly half of renters can't afford housing costs, we know our poverty rates are failing to capture the total picture. So they came up with 200% of the supplemental poverty measure as a threshold. In North Carolina, that represents nearly 48% of the population. 56% of children under 18 and 62% of people of color. So who are these 140 million poor people? These are people who cannot afford a bill of $400 without borrowing money from someone else, or possible eviction, having their electricity or water cut off, missing needed medications, debt collectors, bankruptcy. This $400 could be a car repair bill, a missed paycheck, a medical bill. One of the interesting things about this is that some politicians have picked this up and no longer use the official government figure about poverty. So we have partially changed the dialogue in political circles. I mentioned that the Poor People's Campaign has brought all of the issues together. So we talk about systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative as interlocking issues. We cannot talk about one without talking about the others. So for example, where does Duke Energy put their coal ash? In poor communities. Why? Because land is cheaper there. So why is land cheaper there? Well, because property values are lower in communities of poor people, which are often largely African-American communities. And because of the exposure to environmental hazards, the health of people living in those communities suffer. But politicians tell us that we cannot afford to expand Medicaid because the wealthy and corporations need tax breaks, which then results in higher taxes for the people on the bottom due to changing the sales tax to include services like haircuts and oil changes to offset the revenue that was lost by cutting taxes for the wealthy. Meanwhile, on the national level, the military gets even more money than they ask for so that we can kill people more efficiently, and we can continue to support the arms industry so that they can bribe politicians with their campaign contributions so that the politicians vote for more money for them. In addition, the military is one of the biggest contributors to pollution, bringing catastrophic climate change closer. 72% of government greenhouse gas emissions are from the military. I want to read a piece from a letter I got from Peace Action. Since the start of the war in Afghanistan, Pentagon spending has cost us over $14 trillion of our tax money. Estimates are that 1/3 to 1/2 of that money went straight into the coffers of arms manufacturers and private military contractors. Weapons makers have spent $2.5 billion on lobbying Congress over these past 2 decades. What's more, they have over 700 lobbyists pushing their pro-war agenda. That is more than one lobbyist for every single member of Congress. The current partisan debate in the mainstream media misses the core lesson. Our interventionist foreign policy, with its persistent emphasis on military might, is morally and strategically bankrupt. It is time to reckon with the fact that spending $750 billion on the Pentagon annually is just plain wrong. Yet the Biden administration requested $13 billion more for the military than Trump did. This increase, just the increase alone, is 33% greater than the entire Centers for Disease Control budget. Fighter jets, bombers, and missiles are utterly useless against threats such as COVID-19. But we're told that we cannot afford universal health care. We cannot afford pay raises for teachers. We cannot afford to raise the minimum wage. And we cannot insist that Duke Energy move quickly to energy sources that do not destroy our planet, because the shareholders need a large return on their investments, and corporations and the wealthy need tax breaks. I might add that after the huge tax breaks that were given to the wealthiest people in our country several years ago, my income tax went up with no increase in my income. I sent an invoice to Tom Tillis for this increase, but of course, I never got a response. So who suffers? Certainly the poor and low wealth people, but we all suffer. For example, we all pay more for medical bills, partly because the providers need to cover the costs for those people who have no insurance and cannot pay, which then raises our insurance premiums. And of course, the insurance companies have to pay their CEOs high salaries and hire people whose job it is to reject claims, raising our premiums higher. When I went to the dentist not long ago, the person who handles the billing told me about a friend who had gone to work for an insurance company. And this person was told that on Mondays, she should shred 1/3 of the stack of claims on her desk because the people would just file again. Once again, who suffers? We all suffer from climate change. Crime is higher because many people are kept at poverty wages. And if we had universal health care, just maybe some people would get the help they need for their mental health needs. These are just some of the ways in which all of these are interlocking issues. So where do we go from here? The Poor People's Campaign has been putting as much pressure as we can on Senators Manchin and Sinema to get them to end the filibuster and vote to support voting rights legislation. Reverend Barber reminds us that our deadline is not a date, but victory. So defeat now is just temporary. So one of the things that we talk about is the third Reconstruction. So the first Reconstruction was after slavery was abolished. The second was the Civil Rights Movement. And we are now launching the third Reconstruction. There are two essential ingredients of the first two that we're working on now. These were increased voting rights and a fusion movement that brought people together to work for justice across societal lines that divide us. The third reconstruction is a long-range campaign in which we need to join together people of all faith traditions or no faith tradition, people of all races, people of all economic positions, people of all sexual orientations, etc. We have to expose the ways in which the politicians have created lines of division and convince people that they have enemies. We have to be a fusion movement. We'll be having a Moral Monday rally in Raleigh on Monday, March 28th on the Bicentennial Mall between the General Assembly and the Capitol building. This is leading up to a large gathering in Washington on June 18 for a mass moral rally. So first I want to talk about the Moral Monday March on Raleigh. I expect that many of you participated in the Moral Monday events in 2013. So this will be the 2022 version of a Moral Monday. We're organizing buses from around the state as well as from South Carolina and Virginia. There is a bus scheduled to leave from the Church of Reconciliation parking lot in Chapel Hill and another from the School for Conversion in Durham. Bus fare is $30 round trip, but there is a code that one can use to get a free seat on the bus if you cannot afford the fare. Buses will leave at around 4 p.m. And to get more information about that event, you can go to the RSVP link in the chat. And then for a seat on the bus, there's a link in the chat also for getting a seat on the bus. Now about the Moral March on Washington on June 18, there will also be buses for this rally. At this point in time, there will be a bus leaving from the Church of Reconciliation parking lot in Chapel Hill, and there will also be a bus from First Presbyterian Church in Durham. There might be other buses in the Triangle area, but they haven't been organized yet at this point. Now, if you go to the website to reserve a seat on those buses, the addresses are wrong. The one from Chapel Hill, they have from leaving from the middle of Franklin Street downtown, which doesn't make any sense at all. And I don't know where they got that address, but so anyway, the addresses are wrong and we will get those fixed, but you can still sign up for the bus. And in fact, it's probably a good idea to sign up now because right now the round trip bus fare is $55. And what I've seen is it's scheduled to increase on March 20. So it's a good idea to sign up now for the bus, even though we'll get the addresses for the departure points fixed. Now we might get some discount codes for this, but at this point we do not have them. So when you reserve a seat on the bus, you need to enter a credit card number and you won't be charged until about a week before the event. And you can cancel at any time up to that point. The bus will leave sometime around 4 a.m. and be back around 9:30 p.m. A few years ago, we had about 80,000 people who came out to an HK&J rally. It would be great if we could have many times that number of people in Washington as a demonstration to the politicians that we are serious and that there are a lot of us. So what are the issues that we are most focused on at this point? Well, certainly voting rights. I mean, that was one of the key ingredients of the first two reconstructions. The second is increasing the wealth of people at the bottom by increasing minimum wage, supporting unionization of workspaces, supporting solid safety nets, assuring affordable housing. Third, universal health care, including treatment for mental health and substance abuse. Fourth is education, early childhood education, quality public education, free college education. Fifth is environment, clean energy, clean water, adequate sanitation. The sixth is the war economy, reducing military spending and focusing on diplomacy. All of this can be paid for with money to spare by cutting the military budget by 10% and repealing the 2017 tax cuts. You can find a lot of data and information on the Poor People's Campaign website. That's just poorpeoplescampaign.org. You can look for the moral budget and also for the third Reconstruction resolution that was introduced in Congress by Representatives Jayapal and Lee in May of last year. The moral budget was written in 2019 while Trump was still in the White House. So the language of that document is dated, but the need for a moral budget remains and the issues are still the same. So what can we do? Well, as treasurer, I can tell you that I would happily take your money. You can give on the Poor People's Campaign website, and donations on that website go to the National Poor People's Campaign. Or you can mail a check made out to the Poor People's Campaign to us, and the address, well, I'll get to that in a minute, there's a PO box here in Durham. And the information about this is on the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign website, and that's just ppc-nc.org, ppc-nc.org. And that there's a donate button there, and it gives you the information about where to mail a check. There's also a link for Venmo on that website. The chat has a link also for donations, and that is a new link that we're using. We've used it. I sent a check made a donation through that just to make sure it's working, and it is working. So you can make a donation through that link in the chat as well. So you can donate, and you can also volunteer. And I don't need to tell you that in addition to the League of Women Voters, there are other organizations that work on voter registration protection. You can also volunteer with the North Carolina Medicare for All Coalition, which is advocating for universal health care. And we can use volunteers at the rally in Raleigh on the 28th also. You can write letters to legislators and newspapers, you can call politicians, you can participate in rallies and protests. Now, you don't have to get arrested as long as you move when you're told to do so. So what's the point of going to a rally? Why should I go to Raleigh on the 28th or Washington on June 18th? And I want to show you a video at this point. I think I can get this working. It's just a less than 2-minute video.
The General Assembly are mortals and not God. The members of the Congress, they are mortals, not God. Bowing down is not an option.
Remember that the roots of Moral Monday began right here 8 years ago. Yeah. We ask you to join us on March 28th for a Moral Monday revival.
We will stand up again. We will march again. We will preach again. We will organize again.
We are going to put a face on the tragedy of the bills that keep our people down, keep our people oppressed. Regionally, Virginia and South Carolina will be bringing our people to join with us. We say we were born for a time like this. We must come together.
We are black, we are white, we are Latino, we are Native American, we are Democrat, we are Republican, we are independent, we are people of faith, we are people not of faith, we are natives and immigrants, we are business leaders and workers and unemployed, we are doctors and the uninsured, we are gay, we are straight, we are students, we are parents, we are retirees. We are North Carolina. We are America, and we're here, and we ain't going nowhere.
So why participate? First, the size of the crowd makes a difference. A large crowd gets media attention, and in turn, politicians have to take notice. And second, I find that going gives me hope, especially as I see the young people who are showing up. You can watch on Zoom, but then you are a spectator, not a participant, and that has a very different feel to it. Participating in person is uplifting and invigorating. Meeting people from across the state and country who are working on the same things you are working on is encouraging, helps break down barriers, and makes connections possible. If you physically cannot manage the trip and a day in Washington, get some friends to join you and watch together on the internet. I know that there's a plan at the Church of Reconciliation in Chapel Hill to show the Washington rally in their fellowship hall for people who are not able to travel. Poor People's Campaign, in the Poor People's Campaign, we focus on the impacted people being the public face. We don't have sociologists making speeches. We have people who don't have health care, or those who have worked multiple jobs just to pay basic bills, or those who have suffered from environmental pollution tell their stories. Do we know people who are homeless by name? How many friends or acquaintances do we have who are poor or hungry, or whose children go to bed hungry? These are the people we have speaking up front. We need organizations that meet urgent needs for people in desperate situations. And it's nice to give money to organizations that address these issues. But that is not the Poor People's Campaign. We're working on getting rid of the systems that make people poor, systems that keep people from getting healthcare that they need, systems that keep racial barriers in place, systems that destroy our planet. We're working to break down barriers. We need to not just give money, but put ourselves in positions where we might not feel comfortable, but where we can meet people who are different from ourselves and help break down our own barriers. Several years ago, I met a homeless woman who camped out next to a nature preserve that I went to. I would listen to her talk about her situation. Then there was a period of several weeks when I did not go to the preserve. The next time I went, Susan told me that she was concerned about me because she had not seen me for a while. I was really touched. I had a roof over my head. I did not worry where my next meal would come from. I had health care. Yet this homeless woman was concerned about my welfare. We are all fellow human beings, and we all deserve food, shelter, and health care. We need to be working on the systems that put people in those kinds of places where they lack the essentials needed for sustainable life. And that is what the Poor People's Campaign is working on. We invite like-minded organizations to join us in working for a just world. Thank you. I'm happy to entertain questions. Do you have some?
Has everybody received the links to the different events?
Well, I'm excited to think about having a campaign on the Bicentennial Mall again, because I attended almost all of the Moral Monday events. I know Mary was there for a lot of them too, and 2013. It's appropriate to return to the original place.
Yeah. Yeah, this rally actually be on the other side of the General Assembly from where we were in 2013.
Yes. Yes,
It won't be on Halifax Mall, it'll be on Bicentennial Mall.
Bicentennial Mall.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
We'd like to fill up Bicentennial Mall.
I think that can happen. I do. We need this.
Dale, all the issues you mentioned are those probably everybody here and a lot more have been working on these in some form in some way for an extended period of time.
Right.
I guess I'd like to ask, and I don't think there's an answer for this, but when can we see some progress? You know, the way things are today. So I don't know. I know there's not an answer for that. And I know we have to keep going in that, but what are even some small steps that could be taken along the way to kind of keep us motivated and energized in that? So does the campaign ever talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, participating in these events, you know, is motivating. Yeah, measuring, you know, how far we've come is very difficult. As I said, we've partially changed some of the dialogue when politicians start talking about 140 million poor people. given the senators we have in North Carolina, we have to work on voting rights. I think one of the biggest things that the League of Women Voters does, and can do, and you can keep doing it, is getting people registered to vote and then motivating them to actually go to the polls. I was in the role of vote protector a few years ago in a county north of Durham, someplace, and I've forgotten exactly where it was. Maybe it was Granville County, I don't remember. In a rural place, and this African-American man came up and he went in to vote. And when he came out, we asked him if there were any problems. And he said, no, there were no problems. He said, I voted, but I don't think it will make any difference. And just encouraging people to vote and saying, yes, your vote counts and it's important, is one of the best things you can do, I think. Unfortunately, I mentioned the two things that were common with the first two reconstructions. One was increasing voting rights, and the second was a fusion movement. The other thing that was common with them, which I hope we don't see in the third reconstruction, was the murder of leaders. And that's a concern we all have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't-
when we talk about a long range campaign, it's hard to measure. Maybe 10 years from now, we can say, yes, these are the things we accomplished, but it's really hard to measure and see progress as we go along.
Thank you.
I think one sign of progress is that now even some Republicans at the General Assembly are discussing expansion of Medicaid.
Yeah.
And they're doing it because the money from the feds went up. But at least they're discussing it.
Yeah.
That is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, a good friend of mine always said too, she said, you've got to speak up and do these things, because if they don't, all they hear are their own voices.
Yeah.
And they live in an echo chamber. So that I've found over the many, many years that all of us here have been doing the work that we've been doing. I think that probably has a lot of value to it.
There was a time when I was sending postcards to Senator Tillis's office. I would send one to each of his offices across the state as well as DC. And I figured he would never read them, but it would give his staff a hard time anyway, make them uncomfortable. As I pointed out that people were dying because Medicaid was not being expanded or whatever. And it would give them something to think about anyway.
The league has worked just tirelessly on that Medicaid expansion for several years now.
Yeah.
And, been to the General Assembly, helped partner with other organizations. And so I see hope now. I see a little bit of hope.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
It would be nice if we could have universal health care. I mean, the insurance companies, in addition to paying their CEOs high salaries, have to pay a lot of money for advertising and lobbying Congress, and all of that money could be saved. We would pay a lot less for healthcare if we weren't having to be part of that whole system.
Yes. We need to elect more Katie Porters to.
Hi, Dale. My name is Valerie. I'm in Nash County, and I want to thank Pat Adams for extending the invitation to tonight's hot topic to the league members of the Twin Counties, Nash and Edgecombe counties. So thanks, Pat. And I want to thank you, Dale, for your life of service. It's tremendous. I mean, what you've done throughout your life is meaningful and important. And the fact that you're still not just waving the banner, but, doing the hard work is really impressive. I've got one of the distinctions of having been arrested with Bishop Barber myself. So it's one of the high points of my existence as part of Democracy Awakening back in spring of 2016. And it wasn't just me, it was 1,400 other people and him, but it's, you're right. You're so right about being part of that group and, having your $50 ready to, post bail or pay your fine for incommoding, blocking, it sounds like some kind of bathroom situation, but it's really blocking businesses. Like Congress was taking care of business then. I don't think so. So, and I've been a faithful follower of William Barber, I think ever since the Democratic Convention and the moral defibrillation, one of those words that I have difficulty pronouncing, but he is a magnificent man, and we're fortunate to have, our very own Nelson Mandela, a modern day Martin Luther King Jr. And all of the things that you've talked about, are things that are near and dear to my heart, particularly with the environment, because if we don't take care of our planet, we will cease to exist. So that's really important. And the fact that the Poor People's Campaign recognizes that it isn't just about one thing, that it is about all of these things, and I guess that ensuring the right to vote is probably one of the top things, because nothing's going to get done unless we can get money out of politics and some of these, crazy wackadoos in Washington, D.C. and state houses throughout the country. So I'm catching the bus on the 28th from your church's parking lot and going to ride to Chapel Hill. I do have one specific question though, and it's a really kind of tiny thing, and it really irritates me that there is a person in our community who could very well be related to Ginny Thomas. I mean, this woman is just a SHIT disturber, and anything she can do to like stick a knife in it or cause trouble. And she doesn't even live in Rocky Mount, for example. She lives in Nashville, but she has inserted herself into the dialogue here. And if you ever have to get in her car, Fox News is on, and Newt Gingrich is her hero, and so on and so on and so forth. She fancies herself a writer, and she writes some of the most gagsome, smarmy garbage that you could imagine. But she's always cruel to people in real life. And this is the point I'm getting to. She's titled her book, Repairers of the Breach. And she has a podcast, Repairers of the Breach. She's always repairing the breach because she's a historic preservationist, which is, interestingly enough, one of the few areas where Republicans and Democrats often see eye to eye, having lobbied for that in DC myself on numerous occasions. So is there a trademark on that phrase, repairers of the breach? I mean, I guess it's a biblical term, but to me, she's doing some kind of infringement. I know there are repairers of the breach churches, I believe. Do you know anything about the Poor People's Campaign and their use of that phrase and how that might be addressed to her some way? Because she just chaps my hide.
Yeah. I really don't know. I do know if you Google Repairs of the Breach, there is another website, Repairs of the Breach also. And I don't know. So that phrase is used by people of different persuasions. And
of course it is.
I doubt that there's any trademark on it. Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of the road, that I followed along and saw that it was used by numerous. And I know it's a little bit off topic, but it's not off topic either, because it's someone co-opting, like it seems a lot of people are doing,
Yeah.
just turning the phrase around, to their own use. And so she's ghastly.
Yeah. I thought I would just mention one thing. You mentioned being arrested with Reverend Barber. I was arrested with him in 2017 with the Medicaid expansion issue, and
Oh,
his case, I mean, he lost his case and he lost the appeal and is now being appealed to the state Supreme Court. And I think the DA is waiting to charge the rest of it, or to prosecute the rest of us until his case is resolved. And so we'll see what happens with the Supreme Court and how they handle it. So.
well, that's a scary proposition, isn't it? Truly, yeah. Well,
Jennifer,
yeah, I guess we're a band of brothers and sisters in that respect. So we know we're in good company. Definitely a badge of honor.
I think Jennifer has a question.
Yeah, please, I'm hesitant to ask this question because I don't, please take it as being meant in a very positive and supportive, way. Although, so I went to an event that Reverend Barber did. It was last August or something on Halifax. And there weren't very many people there. And I've sort of been following the Poor People's Campaign in North Carolina, to some extent, and participating in things nationally and so forth. But I don't understand why. It seems to me that it hasn't really taken off. I mean, that it hasn't attracted the kind of mass support, in the numbers and so forth that you really need to have an impact. And I don't really understand, because I have just tremendous respect for Reverend Barber. He's an incredible leader, and the vision, and all the facts you laid out, it's all there. I mean, it's not a question. I don't think it's not a question with the content as such, I don't think. But somehow, either because it's because it's too broad and no one sees it as being their specific thing, or maybe it's North Carolina and they just haven't, and it's been more successful in really generating more of a movement in other states. But I mean, what am I wrong? Are there like lots of people that are participating in this and I'm just not seeing them? What's your take on because on developing this into a movement and getting it to scale?
Yeah, a couple of responses to that. One is to say that as a data manager for North Carolina, I know that there are over 20,000 people who are in our listserv who get regular emails, and a lot of those people, I mean, there are a significant number who never open emails at all, but a lot of those people are regular readers of the emails that go out. I've also been puzzled because 2013 we had as many as 5,000 people who'd show up for a Moral Monday, and then and sometime around then, I don't remember what year it was, HKNJ, we had 80,000 people show up, and then we have as you mentioned, this rally on Halifax Mall, there were maybe 200 or 300. So part of it right now, I think, is COVID, but part of it also depends on what the politics of the moment are. And in 2013, the Republicans had control of the General Assembly and the governor's office, and there was a lot of protest around things that they were doing at that time. And now, they no longer have veto-proof majority in the General Assembly, and there's a Democratic governor, and so people, I think, have relaxed and sort of back off. And, I don't know what the dynamics of all of that is, but I think part of it is just the political moment that draws people out. That's the only explanation I have for it. Of course, right now COVID is also affecting it. So.
What's happening with I know there was an effort to establish chapters around the state. What can you describe whether that has, what the situation with that is? Are they, and what they're doing?
Yeah, there's a chapter in Asheville. There's a chapter in Charlotte. There's a chapter in the Triad area. There's a chapter in Triangle, and the Triangle chapter has gotten involved with the Fed Up project, which is a project of the Poor People's Campaign, Carolina Jews for Justice and Raise Up 15. And
Yeah.
so that's where a lot of the energy has been going lately. The Fed Up project is sort of phasing out. And so what's going to happen with the Triangle chapter, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we're going to go next. I think we have to get reinvigorated in some ways to get going on that.
Yeah, I volunteered a couple times for the
Yeah.
FedEx thing in Durham, so
Yeah.
I think it was a good initiative, but
Right.
they were saying that they weren't going to be able to sustain it.
Yeah.
And so they did, as you say, they wrapped it up, but I know Raise Up is still out there doing some stuff.
Yeah.
So I hope that something else is, but I mean, I just don't understand, because the need is there, the activists are there. Certainly, I mean, all of us have, I'm sure on this call, have tremendous respect for Reverend Barber and his
Yeah.
ability to know, articulate things and lead, and yet people are not following. And I just don't,
Yeah.
I don't understand it exactly.
Yeah. Krishna.
On your website, I came across this incredible map of low-income voters.
Hmm.
It's stunning, really. And I was just wondering, I mean, following up on Jennifer's question there, that do you have chapters across the country? And, or are there other groups that you closely work with that can cover these low-income voters, that can energize these low-income voters?
Yeah, I think each state has different, structure and different organization, and different local organizations they work with. I know that in the Charlotte area, they're doing a lot of work in canvassing, getting people registered to vote. So I don't know about the organizational structures of other states as well. And how much, some states are pretty weak. They just have a central office, and other states have branches all over the state. So it varies a lot from state to state.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm not seeing any more hands raised. Just,
Right.
are you seeing any?
Yeah.
This has been wonderful, Dale. Thank you so very
Well,
much.
thank you. Thank
Been my
you.
pleasure to hear you again. And so thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah, and
Enjoy,
thank you.
enjoy your takeout.
And
with your
thank you for the work that you all are doing. It's very important.
Thank you. It's great to hear from you. Thank you so much. Yay. Yay.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Join us again in next month. We have lots of other programs. We're going to bow out of next month's Hot Topics, but we have several other programs lined up next month. So please join us. Look at our website, look at our Facebook, and join us when you can. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dale. That was incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
night.
Everybody doing okay? Good. Good, good.